Okay, we need to go out. Here. Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I had a few technical issues and then also a bit of surprise rain. So, yeah, we're a bit in the dark here as it seems. So we might just find an area that's a little bit less dark further out on the deck. For now, if you want to just, we've got your questions so far. For those that are on here now, so we get a bearing as to where you're from, if you could all, say the region you're in. That way, when we see your questions coming up, we can know how to relate it based on where you are in the world. So yeah, if you could start doing that on the live feed, on the right or left side, depending on what it is for you, and we'll go find a place that's not so dark. Awesome. There we go. Yeah, if we point out this way. Yay, we're on. Bit of a mad morning. Cool. So you see here behind us is a whole row of inga beans, and as we skim around here, you see the top canopy of our food forest, bananas, inga beans and whatnot, and then the Byway Hills. Sure, yeah.
Good morning.
Morning. Also, we've got Talia from Whangarei and Alan, you can see us. Yay! Awesome. Cool. Okay, so yeah, keep coming through with where you're from. I see Alan, you're from Otaki. That's awesome. We just had a couple here from Otaki actually, so that's pretty neat. Okay, so we've got our first question, which is from the comment section from the video. So if you do have any questions from now on, do post them on the live chat that you guys have been using there. But we'll start with the ones that have first come through from the comment section. So we have, I believe it's Georgia. Georgia, if you're on, if you wouldn't mind just quickly letting everyone know where you're based, but we'll start answering your question. Okay, Georgia, she said, when do you recommend planting rows north to south or just off contour? And what distances apart, or even doing rows? And when doing rows, do you do completely inner rows, in line or slightly out of alignment, depending on what plants? Looks like you might use plants, you might plant 2 to 3 plants wide. And what about in between rows? I have seen some practitioners planting veggie rows in between, or even biomass and bananas and papayas, etc. Cool. Awesome, big question. So let's start. So we'll go from the top. When do you recommend planting rows north to south or just off contour?
Right. So in Central South America, you often see that the contour is pretty much ignored, and south-north is the dominant way of laying it out. And that is especially so when you have rows of vegetables in between. If you don't do that, if you just want a forest garden, then your tree rows are quite close together. And pretty soon those lines blur and it just becomes one big mixed up block, and you can hardly see where the lines were initially. So in that sense, it doesn't matter after a while. Once the lines are established, it just blurs together once you get out of the initial stage. However, when we got here to New Zealand and we have a very steep slope, then we went more the permaculture way and laid out the rows according to contour. And the reason for us is it gives you immediately an anchor point for your logs to lean against across the slope. Yeah, so if you have your rows pointing downhill, it will be hard for quite a while to find trees to put the logs behind to give you a bit of a hold for your litter and to walk on and all these sort of things. So it sort of is a bit dictated by how steep the slope is. And then if your rows are further apart, then it doesn't matter so much anymore either, because then you get your sun coming in anyway, even so you are not holding the north-south direction. Want to add anything to that? Or?
Yeah, I think it just the conversation between when you would prioritize the slope over the sun angle, I think is quite important.
Yeah, I wouldn't be able to give an angle where that would change over, but the main thing is that giving you something to put a log against, that is quite important. And our slopes are sometimes so steep, we actually use those trees then also to sort of walk around. But what is also something important that you need to keep in mind is when you have rows alternating the strata. So in one row, you might want to put in the emergent and medium height. Yeah, emergent and medium height. And then the next row to it, you might want to do high and low. And that way, between the rows, you create a three-dimensional mix-up. So that makes this mixed canopy stratify easier between the rows. And then after a few years, you might not even recognize those rows anymore, because a lot of the trees in the rows will have come out, either because they're not fruiting that well, or because they finished their life cycle. Or if it's, for instance, bananas, you plant bananas in a row, and then after a few years, they're sort of like that anyway. And before you know it, you don't recognize rows anymore. And the rows can be quite close together. If you don't put vegetables in between, the rows can be so close together that mixing up happens a lot faster. If the rows are further apart, like with your vegetable rows, then they will look like hedgerows for much longer than if you have them close together. And then in this row, you have here tree, there tree, there tree, in this row here and there tree. And suddenly they look like a natural forest rather than anything that was planted in rows. So don't worry, it's not going to look like a straight row for very long anyway. But especially in the early stages, it makes management just so much easier having a clear row. And to your specific question of, do you have them right in a row like that, or do you spread them out a bit like that so they're not almost rubbing against each other? There's this fear that we can't figure out that the trees are actually okay in a row as dense as that, because we forget that some of them will fall out pretty quick. And don't forget that the trees, they can put their roots in places where they find less competition between other roots. They figure that out, and so do the branches. So as long as the trunks don't rub against each other, we're pretty safe. And and initially, especially if you have issues with grasses or other dense weeds on the ground, it is so important, especially when you do direct seeding your trees, that you know where to expect those little trees in amongst your grasses, in amongst your whatever else you plant in there. Makes it so much easier. You have so far less losses when you do that, and you're so much faster doing that. And then the other question was, would you maybe have in between biomass rows that are only biomass rows without trees? And yes, of course, you can do that, especially when you do rows with grasses. Say, for instance, if it's a low grass row, as we do in the market garden, sometimes, for instance, cocksfoot. You don't want to put any trees into the cocksfoot because you might want to use an electric mower of some sort, or a tractor mower, whatever, to run over that and mow just the grass frequently. So you don't want any trees in there. You don't want to do everything with a sickle all the time. Or if you have elephant grass or whatever other grasses you use, it is not a good idea to put trees into grass rows. Yeah. But others than that, mix it always up. But grass rows, yes, you can have clumps of elephant grass in your trees rows, no problem. But then you can't mechanize it. If you want to do it on a bigger scale, you want to use certain mowing tools, then you keep your grass row without trees.
And that's what we found in the market garden. We put 2 different syntropy lines in, and in one row we had the sorghum Sudan grass, which we planted as our biomass grass, in the same row as our trees, and we found it really hard to manage it as regularly as we wanted to, because you literally had to sickle around all the trees, and we lost quite a few raisin trees and whatnot due to accidentally sickling them out. Whereas on the other syntropy bed, we actually planted 2 lines of the Sudan sorghum grass on the edges, and then the tree line in the middle, and then that acted as a really nice border for the bed, which meant that all the biomass that we cut from that grass was nicely nestled on either side of the tree rows, and it established the edge of the bed, was the other one sort of like spilled out, and it was the path in the bed wasn't as clearly defined. So yeah, I second Klaus in saying that the one thing you do want to separate is your grass biomass production from your tree row, anything you want to mechanize. And also to sort of go over again about the vegetable, if you wanted to put vegetable beds in between your, thanks Josh, in between your tree rows, that's when it's really important as much as possible to go north to south, because that way at least your vegetable beds will at one point in the day get sun rather than be completely shaded out by your tree rows. So if you plant them north to south in this hemisphere, then the sun will be traveling like that, and then at one point of the day at least that sun's going to go into those veggie rows. And the sort of ball figure measurement is 5 meters between tree crop lines, and then you have either 2 or 3 vegetable beds, depending on how dense you want them, in between those 5 meter apart tree lines. If for whatever reason you can't go north to south, like for us in the market garden, some areas we could do that, and then the other areas, because it was already so established, we had to stick with our west to east orientation, which means we just made those syntropy lines about 10 to 12 meters apart, which allows the sun, if the sun's going like this now, to be able to go enough over that canopy to be able to access those beds in between before the next tree crop. So yeah, just depending on your site, but roughly you can get away with 5 meter apart tree canopy lines with veggies in between if you're going north to south.
Yeah, and just to show you here whilst we're sitting here, see, these are our terraces looking downwards, and it's north facing, so even so the rows are going east-west and the plants are quite dense, each plant can actually access the sun. That's the beauty of having a slope. And keep in mind that when people do syntropy in the tropics and you are within the range of Tropic of Cancer and Capricorn, then sometimes the sun comes from the south and sometimes it comes from the north. So when you are on the slope, that gets mixed up again. But for us, where the sun clearly always comes from the north, the angle is from the north, then our slopes will give us that extra sun exposure, and therefore the contour makes a lot more sense for us. So I hope that answers all aspects of that question. And
I'm just drawing up a little diagram about it as well. But if we want to go to Matt's question next, so we might touch on your question still, Georgia, as I do this diagram, but we'll just go on to Matt's question, which is, what's your process for making biochar? Any techniques or tips would be much appreciated. Also practices in using it, such as how, when to apply, and at what rates, etc. Take it away, Klaus.
All righty, biochar. So yeah, we got very passionate about biochar probably something like 10, 12 years ago when it started getting talked about, and we did a lot of experiments on that. Initially, we made a few mistakes, and nevertheless, it still showed benefits for us. We have learned a lot since. And one thing I mentioned earlier in the video is, don't stop yourself from planting trees or something just because you don't have your biochar ready. It is still more important to get the diversity in and get your trees in and so on. But if you have the possibility to make biochar on your side because you have some pruning wood or something that doesn't want to go through the chipper easily, try to make biochar in an easy way. Don't rush out and buy any gizmo for it. That's not necessary. An old bathtub or just a trench in the ground works fantastic. Friends of us are using, for instance, old fertilizer spreaders from a tractor. It's a nice cone shape. We often use just a stainless steel kitchen sink. Anything that gives you a bit of vessel that restricts oxygen from coming in from the top all the way down to the bottom to burn the embers down to ash. Everything like that helps. Just like a bit of a vessel like that. It could even be an old wok or whatever. And as you make a fire, the embers go down to the bottom and get deprived of oxygen. They still are hot enough to gas off all the volatiles, and they get burned off in flames above. And that's why we call these techniques flame curtain. The flames create a curtain above the embers to exclude the oxygen from reaching the embers. And you have a clean burn, so you don't have this blue smoke, smoldering charcoal making that they did in the old days. And yeah, you lose a bit more to your burn, but you get a clean burn and it's easy. And you want a fairly hot burn as well. The hotter you make the charcoal, the better quality it is for our purpose, because we don't want residuous tar or vinegars in it, because all of those things will stop microbes from colonizing it. And then what I read recently that makes sense is, once you make the charcoal, you quench it with water, or ideally with urine or something high nitrogen, because it does something to the surface. The nitrogen bonds with the carbon structure on the surface to create some interactive surface. It's a chemical bond. It's not about fertilizer adding to it because you use urine. It's something chemically, physically that happens on the surface that makes that biochar even better. And the quenching in general opens up pores, almost as if you make activated charcoal, but it's not quite the same yet. And then after that, what you want to do is you want to wash that biochar in order to get the residues of the ash off the charcoal to make it clean and neutral. Because if the charcoal, your biochar, is too alkaline because of the ash content, that also will stop microbes from living in those pores for quite a while, until slowly it's leached out of the charcoal. Now, that water that you use from washing your charcoal, you still use that as a fertilizer, especially in your bananas or in your paddocks where you need a bit of extra potash. That is all right. But you want your charcoal to be clean in order to be colonized as quick as possible with beneficial microbes. Now you can add that to your compost, and that would be ideal, but we just use that as a texture amendment in our planting holes, because when we dig into our clay, when we fluff up the clay as you plant a tree, or as we prepare our tree rows as an amendment, and the charcoal is one of those things that stops the clay from sticking back together again, especially if you happen to walk on it, which you shouldn't do. But after a while, the clay might start sticking together before the roots can actually go in there and keep it apart. And that's where all these amendments like scoria, sand, whatever you get your hands on, or your biochar that you make, they go in between the clay blobs and keep them from sticking back together, and allow water to penetrate and air to exchange and so on. So that's what we like about it. And then the biochar also helps, of course, holding water, holding nutrients, all of those things. And the cherry on the top of the cake is that we sequester carbon forever. Yeah. But it allows a lot of exchanges in the soil, just as it was humus. Now, should one crush it up or not? Apparently, the ideal particle size of biochar is something like 5 millimeters. That means unless you use bamboo or rotten wood, which makes an easily crumbly biochar, you don't have to crush it anymore. Unless you do that, you might want to put it through a garden shredder to make it small. And don't put it through petrol chipper because if it's dry, the charcoal can actually explode as a charcoal cloud. It can make a carbon combustion. So I would recommend using electric instead. Bathtub, you made it, and you go in there with a hammer or something, or a piece of wood, and smash it up a bit tedious. So a different way of doing that. But if you just put it in chunky as it is in a planting hole, it's not perfect, but it's still good. So that's maybe the recommendation on how to use it. But mind you, most people that do syntropy don't even go there. They think it's not necessary, just build up organic matter otherwise, and that's it. But in the permaculture world, it's used a lot, and we have good experience with it. We keep doing it. It works for us, and we would like to have more. But again, priority for us is pruning trees, planting trees, and we make biochar more as a byproduct when we do barbecues, when we do campfires, when we burn orchard trash, and so on. We rarely do it as a separate activity. It's usually just as part of what we're doing, and it's a byproduct for us. So that's how we treat it.
And
okay.
I was just thinking about in situ biochar holes, just as a way.
Yeah. You want to explain how you did that?
So there's another way as well that you can do biochar in situ, so in place of where you're wanting to plant. So especially valuable if you're on clay. So as Klaas was saying, you want some kind of vessel, ideally that's like conical shape, sort of shaped like that, which means that when you have the fire in there, you're creating a flame curtain, which means that the air that's coming into this bucket per se is getting burnt off, and it's not able to access the wood underneath here, which means that wood can then turn, instead of into ash, it can actually turn into charcoal, which then you quench and make into biochar, right? So ideally you have a vessel size like that, which is conveniently the same shape as you would a planting hole. So a way of doing in situ biochar is that you dig your hole for your plant, you put in wood and kindling and whatnot, and then light the fire, and then just build up the fire until you've got enough biochar there for that hole. So let's say then you end with about, a quarter full of biochar, and quench it on site with your nitrogen-rich water liquid. And then that basically is then perfect amount of biochar in your planting hole already. And what it's then created is all the liquid that you've put into quench is actually going to seep through all the cracks that have been created by the heat interaction with the clay wall around your hole. Basically, almost creating like a pottery-like form that's a lot harder and doesn't swell and shrink as much as non-heated clay. So you've got this really porous sort of outer zone of your hole from the fire that you've had in the hole, and the liquid that you've poured in to quench the biochar is actually, it stays in your hole, in your soil then, and sort of seeps further out in that direction. And then you need to mix in with a spade, start digging in the biochar with a bit of that surrounding clay, so it's not just pure chunk of biochar at the bottom. That wouldn't be too friendly for the worms and the plants. So you mix that all in, and then you mix your soil, put your mix your soil back in, put compost in, and then you can plant your tree into that hole. And basically that tree then will just have all that goodness to access in situ right there. So yeah, this is just another sort of more cowboy in place way of making biochar as well, which I've done quite a bit up on the food forest up top, and I've really seen a big difference with using biochar in the clay soil up there. Anywhere where I've used biochar, the friability of the soil is just tenfold. It's amazing. Cool. So just whilst Klaus pulls up the next question, I just want to quickly touch on George's question again with the diagram, just to make clear, because we were using a lot of hand diagrams. So just to make sure that people understood it. I'll just wipe that one off. So yeah, basically that's the ideal orientation, north to south. That way you have the sun going the whole way, accessing at least one point in time the beds. You've got your tree rows 5 meters apart, and your vegetable rows in between that, or your biomass rows, whatever it might be. And like Klaus mentioned, you want to use that sort of biointensive farming practice of staggering your different layers. So if you've got an emergent on this side, you wouldn't have another emergent on that side, because they'd be conflicting one another. So you do emergent, medium, low, emergent, so you're just staggering them out, so that even that way, as well as just that way, they are working in balance depending on their strata. And then obviously, so that distance there would increase another double if your orientation was west to east. And then just a little other diagram here. This would be sort of our ideal recommendation of a syntropy row. So we've got all your main trees in the middle here, with then obviously in the first year you'd plant all your vegetables and whatnot in here as well. And then on the edges of your bed, you'd have your grass rows, which then you'd cut and mulch into these lines here, as well as all the mulch that you get from the trees later on. You cut that and then mulch it into these areas in here. And then you've got your defined pathways on either side, so you're not walking everywhere and you're not compacting everything. So defined pathways are really important. Having a border of edges of grass along the edges is really, really beneficial. We found to define the edge of the pathway and create that biomass for your beds. So yeah, just a rough diagram there for you guys to see. Awesome. Okay, so now
Mark is asking if we do have any problem with guava moss, and the guava moss is around here. We put up traps when we first heard about them being in the area, something like 12 years ago, 14 years ago. We put some traps out and we caught some right away. However, ever since, we can't really put a finger on it. I mean, we find the occasion fruit that has a hole in it drops earlier, but you really have to look hard for that. So it doesn't seem to be a problem here, and we don't know why it is not a problem. I mean, obviously we have a high diversity of birds and insects here and everything that might keep it in balance, but so do other people that still have problems with it. So we might be just lucky, or we have more diversity, or our plants are healthier and can repel them by having more sap flow to flood them out. We don't know, but at the moment, touch wood, it is not a problem for us that we have to put our head around at all. No.
You also had another question by Mark, just below that one. Not by Mark, sorry, by Matt. Around where, could you recommend any good resources that contain the life cycles of the key plants you use to assist the bed planting planning? So, yeah.
No, sorry, we can't. There's only a limited amount of information in Spanish and Portuguese. We will work on our own plant catalog and will release that on this channel here in the future. You won't find that information in normal plant IDs. I mean, you find a bit here, you find a bit there, and that's how we piece it together ourselves, combined with the experience that we have. So yeah, unfortunately, those things haven't been covered yet by normal horticulture, unfortunately. There's just a new book that came out by Fernando Rebello, a comprehensive book on syntropy, but it's written for Brazilian conditions and it's in Portuguese only so far. We just got it the other day as an ebook, and there is a section in there. So we will use that as a starting point to do our own catalog, and then fill in things that they're not addressing, and make it more relevant to us in New Zealand. And we will start sharing that information on Patreon.
But for now, just simply Googling the individual plants that you're wanting to work with, and just finding out when they start fruiting, when they stop fruiting, when they decline in health, and that sort of information you can start basing what their life cycle is. Just observation and asking, farmers that specify in a particular crop, they'll know all about that tree. So just starting to resource out there. You won't specifically find it listed under their life cycle, but you'll be able to find that information based on when they fruit and when they decline in health, and start building up your own repertoire that way.
Just some other characteristics you want to look into when you look at plant IDs. They usually tell you likes full sun or can handle semi-shade. And when we see that, we normally take it a notch down and say, okay, if a plant can handle semi-shade, for us that translates into can handle shade, because our shade is different to what people normally consider shade, because our shade is dynamic. And then there's another difference as well. If you plant into shade that is already in old shade, then plants can be pissed off about that. But if they grow together with the right companion plants in the right successional situation, then they can handle a lot more shade than when they're plonked into an already old existing shade situation. It's quite different for them if they're part of the dynamic growing into a shadier environment. Underneath shorter living plants, longer living plants can handle a lot more shade than if you put them under the shade of longer living plants. It's quite different. They seem to completely know their place and understand their different types of shade because of their place in succession. It's quite amazing. And having a pulsing shade as we do, where we open up once or twice a year, it makes a huge difference for these plants. And then they can go into standby when they are into shadier conditions than what they are designed for. And when it opens up, just like in the forest, when a tree falls over, suddenly they make a jump, and then they go on standby again, and they can handle it all right. But we need to also know where we overstep the boundaries, because when plants do get starved too much of sunlight for their own liking, then they will not have enough energy to create protective substances that keep them healthy against insect attack or fungal attack. And then you find things like lemon tree borers and so on coming in, puriri moss and whatnot. And they can start boring into these trees because they don't have enough sap flow to drown these invaders. And that's when we have overstepped the boundary. So these are sort of indicators that you can learn from. And then you need to open up practically or before that. And you can see if plants are starting to get a bit sickly. You can see that.
And that's a key feature that in syntropy is observing those indicators, those pests, those diseases, not as the cause, but a symptom of what's going on deeper down. So when you do have puriri moss or cicadas or insect damage or fungal damages, that they are indicating to you a certain stagnancy or a certain overshading or some bigger, wider sort of cause of the invitation of those pests. So instead of just going out even with organic herbicides or pest control, actually listening and observing from those teachers and then addressing the core issue, which is maybe too much sun, too much shade, too much moisture, trees in the wrong spot, all those things. So yeah, really trying to observe and observe those teachers.
And then other things that you can pick up in plant IDs. When a plant is said to need fertile soil, then we can read it as, okay, it's more from the abundance system. And if a plant is hardy, can live on poor soil, okay, then we can think, okay, there might be an accumulator plant. Then when you read plant catalogs or plant ID books, and you get really excited about a plant, and then right at the end of the description it says needs free draining soil, then us that live on a clay soil go like, and then you feel like you're wasting your money buying a plant like that to put it on clay soil. However, us here now being a few years down the line, using syntropic techniques, using permaculture techniques, using biochar and all these sort of things, we found now that we have turned our soil around. So these plants that supposedly need deep free draining soil, we say, well, we got it now, and we can start using them. But we still prefer direct seeding them now because the risk to lose a lot of money on them is far reduced. So rather than rushing out and buying a lot of grafted avocados, we just go out now and plant heaps of avocado seeds everywhere. And then when they develop nicely, then we graft something on that and save a lot of money that way.
So then our next question is from Mark, who's in the Kaipara. Kia ora, Mark. You did a PDC with us too. So your question was, following contour lines, even with a north-facing slope, will give areas that will have north to south orientation for vegetables too, wouldn't it? We'll say that one again. Following contour lines, even with a north to face slope, will give areas that will have north to south orientation for vegetables too.
Well, initially, yes.
Oh, I see, because it'd be going
initially,
that way, yeah.
yes. And then later on, you might lose that. Or you go into vegetables that can handle a bit more shade, or, yeah, like potatoes, for instance, you could still grow even so your shade increases. So it depends what type of vegetables you grow. Some can handle a bit more shade. And then also, if that is your intention, that you have a north-facing slope, you want trees, you want it on contour, but you still want to have vegetable beds in between, you could also design your tree rows that they are mostly comprised of either trees that you want to prune anyway, say in winter, to let the sun in, yeah. Say, for instance, Inga beans. You might want to prune them in winter because you can. They're evergreen.
And that's when they fruit. So then
but the fruit in winter, you prune them, harvest the fruit on the ground, and you can completely stack on them. And then in spring, they come back beautifully. So you almost make them into a deciduous tree that way. Same goes for flame trees if you want to be a risky character like us and grow flame trees. But then other deciduous trees, if you have them on your slope, say for instance raisin trees, they are almost naked by now, and then you could have your vegetables on your north-facing slope throughout winter. They get the sun, and then during summer you could use that area for a more shade-tolerant a green manure or whatever. And for us, for instance, it could make sense that in summer we have our vegetables down on our moister flats, and in winter we could have them on our slope in a terrace situation between tree rows, and we would design the trees to be deciduous or be heavily pruned in winter. So you could do that, no doubt about that, and it could make a lot of sense. But yeah, you would have to choose the right trees or keep them at a certain height so you still get that light coming in. Because keep in mind, in winter, your sun is coming from a more flat angle, so your trees will block the sun onto your vegetable beds more so than in summer. But if they are deciduous, then there would be enough sun coming in still. And then don't forget, you still get the morning sun, evening sun coming in a bit better. So all of that could work all right.
And also, even in that, you still don't really want to have defined areas, your tree production and your vegetables as such. You do want to keep them moving, because you want that soil in all locations to really develop over the different years. So you don't want it to set it back and keep areas always at annuals. So probably a healthier, more dynamic way of integrating vegetables with your perennials is actually doing a sort of rotation across your food forest area, where you do one row of food forest starting with your annuals, and then the next year you start another row and then plant annuals into that, where this one's evolved another year and it can't take annuals anymore, and then so on. And you sort of incrementally move your way around, so you actually to plant with enough density and manage those systems appropriately, because you're doing it sort of incrementally rather than a whole area at once. And you're able then every year to have an area where you have annuals, and then once you've come to the end of your area of land for food forest, then you can go back to the start, heavily prune that system, allowing enough light and space to plant annuals again, and then it all comes up again, and then so forth, sort of rotate your way around and cycle around your food forest in that way. And that sort of pulsing and that dynamic will actually really give vibrancy and health to your overall system, never holding it in one stagnant phase of its evolution. Keeping that dynamic flowing is what keeps the vitality up. So that's another way that you can integrate vegetables into that space.
Thanks, Frida. That is, we are only just starting that now. We did that last winter. You've seen probably some of our videos where we had potatoes put into the system that we heavily reset, and we realized actually we can use that a lot more. We're sometimes a bit too timid about doing stuff like that, to totally resculpture the whole system. And when we bring everything down, that doesn't mean that we kill those trees. We just totally reset them, and most of our trees can handle it totally easy. The cherry moors, the bananas, the avocados, all of them can handle it totally easy. And the amount of mulch we get when we do that is a phenomenon. Of course, the vegetables that we plant into that mulch must be something that can handle such a tremendous amount of a mulch cushion. Obviously you can't sow carrots into something like that, but you can put pumpkins in there, you can put potatoes in there, tomatoes, and all of those sort of things, not a problem. And I think humans would have figured that out, and we would have actually evolved with much more forest gardens in our history. But unfortunately, because only recently we have chainsaws and machetes, and especially in our case electric chainsaws, that make the whole thing a lot more fun to do, humans for too long relied on fire to do these sort of things. And when you do it with fire, then you cannot have those trees coming back. They are dead then when you burn it. But having no steel tool, having no chainsaws, that work would have been far too massive for people to do. So they resorted to just felling with stone axes or whatever, and then burning it. And then of course you don't have your cherry moyas and your avocados coming back after that. But now we can. So we can actually reset our forest gardens and give it, after 5 or 10 years, we give it an annual phase, have a bumper crop of annuals, and then bang, we are right back into the perennial crops the second year. So, and each time we do that, the soil still gets better. We're just improving the fertility by doing something radical like that. And that's how forests operate. Trees falling over in a storm, and then we have a sudden bounty coming off of shorter-lived plants that fill the gap in a hurry. And then, poof, we are back into perennial tree crops and so on. That's how the forest operates. and we can do that too, and we can stimulate it even faster and more intensively and more with the fruit trees that we want than the forest does. So that's the real art of syntropy, to develop that further and shape that like making a pottery sort of thing and starting again and doing something better and so on, and yeah.
So our next question is from the Loop crew. Nice seeing us here the other day as well. We have inherited a large block of unmaintained feijoas planted in north-south rows on a north-facing slope. Where do feijoas fit in the food forest ecosystem?
All right. So feijoas, they are hardy and they're sun-loving. And having them in north-south is sad in a way, but because it's a slope, so again, I would rather have it on contour, but you wouldn't want to rush out and change that now, so you just take it as it is. And the nice thing about feijoas is they're tough and they can handle a total reset. You can cut them at ground level and they come up again, not a problem. So if you want to mix it up and start into a food forest system, you want to cut them back at ground level probably, and come in with annuals, short-lived perennials, the whole lot, and then just have the feijoas coming back together with all of that. Or if you don't want to cut it at ground level, you can reduce them to 1 liter, keep them at knee high. That way, you know, they come back in a more civilized way. And and then when they make this pom-pom coming up, then you select the nicest branches, snip out the other ones, give them a nice crown. And meanwhile, you come with all the other things. You might want to have something that goes above them. Just because they're sun-loving doesn't mean that they can't handle anything above them. But they probably wouldn't want a whole lot above them if you want to hang on to the feijoas. If you feel like you have too many, you're not interested in them, you want to send them out sooner or later anyway, then you put more other things in with them. And maybe eventually you phase them out when everything else comes above them or around them, and you guys are on a sort of end of volcanic, so the volcanic soil is a bit wasted on feijoas, so you might want to actually replace them slowly with vegetation that honors that more free draining volcanic soil, be that avocados, be that chestnuts, walnuts, whatever your climatic situation is ideal for. If you want to keep it low and you want other low crops around your feijoas and you want to maintain it like that, a block of feijoas with something else, think of something that is deciduous to go above your feijoas, that gives you the winter sun, so your evergreen feijoas have that winter growth spurt. And that could be, for instance, raisin trees, right? And or it could be chestnuts for volcanics. And then maybe in and amongst your feijoas, something that can stay just below the feijoas and handle a wee bit more shade than the feijoas still. Think blueberries, right? You're on volcanic, think blueberries, slightly acidic. And that way you have something that fills the gaps between your feijoas but doesn't shade the feijoas and still gives you a crop. And again, yeah, raisin trees and stuff above it. So that would be a possibility. And then you might want to do your other food forest somewhere else. You have enough land for doing more, so you don't have to swamp your feijoas out if you have either market or use for them.
So then we've got another question by Alan from, I think you said you were from Tamaki Makaurau, so Auckland. And your question was, what is your favorite dimensions for those centropy rows? Again, it depends on the land size that you have and the slope that you have. The Otaki, sorry, I thought you said that was okay. Confusion. Otaki. So yeah, you're I guess probably on quite flat land. So basically, the rows in our market garden, we keep our row size to about a meter in dimension. That means that we've got enough access on either side of the path without having to lean right over. It just makes management that much easier. If your centropy beds are narrower, it's even more important. It's important anyway, but crucial that then the paths between your beds are fully alive. And by that, I mean that you don't have areas of compaction between your rows. So let's say you've got your one bed here, and then you've got your pathway, and then your other bed here. That pathway here, you want to make sure that you actually dug down, filled with either some sort of like sand or gravel or scoria or lime chip. What we did, we actually dug a big trench, put bamboo inside. So dug a big trench, put bamboo rods inside, and then covered it with lime chip on top. That's quite extreme. You don't need to necessarily go quite that crazy, but just making sure that there's as little as possible compaction along those pathways means that all the space around the pathway is actually alive. You're not creating sort of an anaerobic compacted zone. So that means that when you have the beds on either side, the roots from those trees can actually network and go underneath the path, rather than creating these sort of dead zones where then the trees are constricted to just what's beneath the bed. That then suddenly becomes a little bit too narrow and confined, and then they can get root rot and root bound and all that stuff. So yeah, keeping the parts alive means that you can have enough network of root systems and mycelium networks navigating between the rows, making your horse system function as one. Isolated them in these rows. If you're working on steeper zones, the steeper your land, the narrower your terraces are going to be. Otherwise, you've got a big cliff face that you're cutting into. Like, again, let's draw that out. Knocking you over. So if you've got a steep slope, then if you're doing really wide terraces, then you're going to have quite a big cut into your hillside, which is then, well, it's really hard to draw whilst looking at the video, which then is exposing that face to the sun, drying it out, and yeah, creating sort of a dead space here as well, and also breaking the capillary action of water that actually goes up your slope or up and down your slope. So the bigger sort of cut you have in your slope, the more you're drying out your land. So the steeper your slope, the smaller terraces you want to do to avoid, and so the more frequent, to avoid cutting such big faces into your land. And then on the other hand, the slower your slope, then the wider you can do your terraces. And obviously as wide as possible is great, because then you've got a bigger area that your root systems can go on. But if you go too wide, then they become hard to really manage and go into without walking all around your bed. So yeah, ideally finding that sort of nice middle ground between being able to access from either side, either top or bottom or alongside your centripetal lines, the middle of the bed without walking too much in between, or at least creating sort of defined pathways within that so that you're not compacting all around your beds.
Maybe I touch on a question that came after the last Q&A by Liselle. She couldn't make it to that, and that question came up from other people as well. Why do we why did we make these squares in one place and these narrow rows in other places?
Just to define it, for those people that haven't been to ours, or got certain areas in our market garden where we've done squares, so segments of food forest about 7 square meters in dimension, and then other areas we've done our food forest in rows. So that's what he means by the squares, is sort of 7 square meter blocks of food forest.
It happened so that first we just were going to do rows, and then we felt for these dwarf fruit trees that might be a bit narrow, because they would make their crowns right in our head height, and we would have to go around them, and it was not that easy on pathways, we felt. So we merged 2 beds together and put the dwarf trees in the middle of those, which would have otherwise been a pathway, just to have space to walk around them easier. And then we needed crossway access, so we didn't have to always walk all the row down to get to the next row to step over. And we decided to make these cross pathways as well, and that's how it ended up being squares, and it turned out to work really nicely like that. But any trees that grow more tall before they branch out for fruiting, we feel more comfortable having these narrow rows. Makes it easier to manage, really, in certain ways.
I hope that answers your question. And we've got another question by Georgia. So I think you hopped on a bit later. We answered your other questions that were on the comment section of the post around 20 minutes into the video. So this will be all recorded, so you can listen back on it. But yeah, we did do your questions in depth there. So now your other question here is, what about slugs and snails? Do they not turn up when the forest is functioning well in a similar fashion to other insects and pests? Don't really have that many snails in the food forest, do we?
Well, I mean, that is sort of the curse of growing annuals. I mean, there's so many signs from nature that tell us, why do you actually bother with annual plants when they create so many problems? And so many things go wrong with annual plants, and one of them being slugs, and the other thing being poo-kickers, and the other thing being all of those sort of things. I think it's a lesson for us to actually try to do less annuals and eat more perennials, because it is so much easier, because the establishing phase is the hard one. And but there are some theories out there that slugs eat vegetables more mycelium, mycelium to feed on. So if you have anything decaying as a mulch or so, they're often quite happy to just graze on fungal mycelium and leave the plants alone. But if they don't find enough of that, or the right ones, then they go for your plants. There's this theory out there. There's another theory that came out recently that says, if plants don't have mycorrhizae, then slugs will target them and eat them. And see, most of our vegetables don't associate with mycorrhizae unless they are planted in amongst plants that do have mycorrhizae. So that is a new theory. We don't know if that holds true for us. We do have our slug problems in our vegetables, and we haven't found a solution for that yet, apart from sometimes going out in the evening and picking them. But we try to do more and more perennial stuff and eat more and more of a perennial diet. We feel that is the way to go, and that's how permaculture started in the first place, and that's what nature tells us every day. So maybe that's the way to go about that, really.
So then we've got another question by Alan. What kind of avocado seeds? Sultano.
Well, so apparently Sultano seed has been chosen because it ripens at the time that when you plant it, it is just ready when the regrowth flush of Haas avocado comes on, and the Sultano is not flushing at the moment, so you used a flush of signwood to put on the Sutano. So the timing seems to match up nice with the Sutano. Not necessarily is the Sutano more resistant to Phytophthora, but that could be another issue as well. However, we like at the moment using reed if we can get our hands on it, just because it has so much more volume as a seed that will get through the mulch layers, through the shade that it finds here for us, much more stronger than any other avocado with a smaller seed. So we use them, and of course they split up. So if we plant a reed avocado, it doesn't mean that we get a reed fruit from that plant. However, the chances are that it is a bit like a reed. And so every tree that we grow from a seed will be its own variety. And because we have possibly hundreds of seedling avocados, they take quite a while to start fruiting, but we are in no hurry because they are growing amongst trees that are already fruiting earlier on, bananas, tamarillos and whatnot. So we are not sitting around and weeding around avocado trees that start fruiting after 10 or 12 years. We are eating and selling from that piece of land all along, from the first 3 months to the 12 years when the avocado finally decides to put some fruits out. And then we might look at the fruit and go, yuck, that's awful. And then we might graft on it. Or we might get rid of the tree because there's already too much growing anyway. And we might keep pruning it as a mulch provider. That's another thing. Avocados are good. Or we might find a new variety that is good enough for us, or maybe even good enough to be sold as a new variety. Who knows? I mean, that's how new varieties start. Haas didn't come from a breeding program. It was a chance find. So we just might find another interesting variety that works for us. And we are not selling to pack houses. We are selling on a farmer's market, and they can handle unknown varieties. So, yeah.
But I think, yeah, commercially, usually you do use the Zutano variety because by the time it's mature enough to be able to graft, it's at the right time for Haas to be grafted on or something like that. So that's mainly the reason why people use Zutano. It's not necessarily because it's got a better root structure as a grafting rootstock tree, but it just grows at the right time for then the Haas cuttings to come through. So yeah, there's all that as well.
Right. Ellen asks, where did you get your raisin trees from? Well, you might all be very frustrated at the moment that all the nurseries are sold out their stuff since COVID and whatever. We have just harvested our raisin tree fruit last week before the big rain, and we got thousands of seeds now. They're the size of lentils and they sprout very easily. We grow them in root trainers. They grow fast, and then plant them out when they're sort of half a year old or so. So I guess we should start selling seeds and make that available. We have a really good tree that has shown to grow really fast, even on a very unamended, or actually totally unamended clay soil, under total neglect. Really fast goer and really good fruiter. So yeah, that's our seed provider, and we have shared it already a lot, and we can do more of that because we won't need nearly all of our seeds. So
yeah. So we'll just message us if you're interested in the seeds or anything else really, and we can see if we can meet that. We're not really officially a nursery, so don't have a website as such, but if you are looking for something, let us know. We either might have it available or know nurseries that do have it. For example, there's a nursery actually near us called Twin Falls Nursery. They've got a website. I can link it to the comment section of this video. They're just starting out more as a permaculture nursery, and they're doing a lot of sort of big scale stuff like that, like raising trees en masse brush wattles, inga beans, sapotes, sugarcane, all those sort of food forest plants. So they might be worth checking out as well as an official nursery. Okay, so just being wary of time, we've got a few more questions coming through, so we'll get through those, and then any last questions that come through, and then yeah, see you in another few weeks.
The battery is low, so it might suddenly cut out as well. We're too far away from the house.
We should just be about it,
all right. So,
but yeah,
Ellen
we cut out as well.
Mulch in the market garden. Does your use of rough grass mulch affect how you plant and manage the beds? Difficult direct seeding, encouraging slugs. Yes, I mean, surely you get more slugs with grasses and mulch and so on, but not majorly so. And direct seeding, it depends what you direct seed. If it's a bigger seeded trees or vegetables and so on, they can make it through. But again, carrots in those situations are hard to direct seed into mulch. And as Frida explained already before, the way with planting, we kept the grass rows, the cocksfoot, and the sorghum grass in a good distance from our tree rows. So when we do use small machines, we don't accidentally cut into our tree rows. So that is very important. So as we will show that in a video soon, I'm sure, we use a hedge trimmer on an extension of a weed eater, and so we can cut and sort of throw it onto the bed in one move, sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely prioritize mulch and covering the soil and feeding the soil over the slug effect that you would have from creating that ground for them. Yeah, slugs are just something that if you want annuals, you sort of have to put up with. Have chickens so that you can have a food for them, a use for them. But yeah, definitely would prioritize mulch over that issue completely. Cool. I think we've got one more question coming through from Ellen saying, what's the best way to contact us for supply? Either through the Patreon message system or comment section on any of the videos where you see something listed that you're interested in. Let us know, and then we can see, if we know anyone that has it, or if we have it or whatnot. So yeah, either just privately message us, email us, or through the comment section on any video relevant to that.
Yeah, and if you want to get going with Titonia, we need to figure out a way how to make that available, so you're not sort of set back by not being able to access this amazing plant.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it doesn't handle being shipped for long, so we need to figure out a way how we can bundle it up with something that encourages root formation whilst it's in the shipping process. So yeah, watch the space, but we're going to work on that.
Yeah. Right now it's a bit late to plant anyway, but come spring we'll hopefully find a way to either ship them to you, arrange things, or satellite sort of pinpoint places that have them near you. So like if you're based out in Otaki, there's quite a few people out that ways that do have Titonia, so could link you with some contacts there as well. Likewise for anyone else in the in different regions. But yeah, it's such a valuable plant. We'll definitely try and make sure everyone's got access to it come spring.
And recommendation, get your little hothouses going so you can do your own propagation. Then we could send things out in winter as well, and you just get them rooted in flower pots in a controlled environment and multiply your own planting stock that way.
So then last question we've got is best nut trees for Northland. I've heard of warmer climate hazelnut, which I understand grow better in colder climates. Yeah, we've got a few hazelnuts up our way, but haven't fruited yet, so we can't really say whether they're successful in our warmer climate or not. Best nut trees for us in our experience are pecans, chestnuts, walnuts if you've got free draining soil, and macadamias for really poor soils. They handle quite heavy clay.
But it's typical. People in a hazelnut climate want to grow macadamias, and people in macadamia climate want to grow hazelnuts. But yes, ours have flowered and made sort of nuts, but they were hollow. So we don't know if that's climate related or they aren't old enough or bad pollination. We don't know yet, but it's tricky.
And also, see, you've got a few macadamias already.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah. Awesome, guys. So that's been a really good session. Sorry again for the late start and the rainy morning. Yeah, we are going to run another live stream for this month, just because we realized with the different time zones, evenings don't always work for some people and vice versa mornings. So we're going to do 2 months from now on, one in the evening and one in the morning, to cater for everyone where they are in different parts of the world. So yeah, our next one is on the 27th, so Sunday 27th of June, and we'll be doing it in the evening at 8 p.m. So sadly won't be able to be out in the food forest, but then hopefully we won't have a hiccup being caught out in the rain either. But yeah, see you then, and get your questions ready for that. I'll try and put the notice out for the live stream a bit earlier as well, so you can start putting the comments on there, questions as you think of them, or just in your notebook as you come along. But yeah, look forward to seeing you guys all then if possible, and any new people faces then as well. And again, thank you for supporting us on Patreon. It's made yeah, it's been a huge difference for us being able to really share in this way, more one-to-one, as well as just having your support and enthusiasm from our Patreon videos. It's just given us so much inspiration and encouragement to keep going and sharing and exploring and researching what we do. So yeah, big, huge thank you to you all.
And yeah, hopefully next time we don't have the same technical glitch. It was really stressful for Frida this morning, but she did figure it out in the end, but it was very stressy. So, okay. Hey, thanks for watching. And yeah, it's great to get all these questions from you. It puts us on the spot, and we learn every time from your comments. And yeah, let's try to grow this movement. It's just such a beautiful thing to do, and it's so satisfying. And just another mouth-watering finish of the video. So just look at it. Isn't it beautiful? Yeah. Look at that. Oh.
Ka kite no whānau.